Welcome, Sarah, to the Dating Intentionally podcast. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm so excited to connect. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this is surreal because I've been following you and watching your videos for a few years now, and I'm so glad I get to actually talk to you because I have so many questions.
Oh, good. Yeah, I'm excited. I feel like there's so many pages that have popped up over my 5 years doing this, and yours has definitely been one of them. It's just like everyone's doing similar work, but slightly different in their own way. So I'm excited to hopefully bring a perspective that resonates with your audience, but maybe in my own unique way.
Hell yeah. So, okay, you've worked with thousands of people to feel more secure in their relationships. Why is this work so important to you?
Yeah, so I'm sure similar to how you got started, I was doing this because of my own experience with love and relationships. And I realized that I had a lot of anxiety that I brought into my very healthy, loving relationship. And to make a very long story shorter, we're married now. We got married this year, but if we rewind about 5 years ago when I was in the depths of anxiety in my relationship, I just felt so stuck, so lost. I was having questions like, how can you be sure that you're with the right person? And what if you don't love him enough? And I would get so sucked into the comparisons of seeing these magical reels where like someone would be making out in a hot tub and they were like, I'm so attracted to my person, like can't get enough. And I was like, wait, oh my gosh, am I doing something wrong? And was really just wrapped up in a lot of mental games about analyzing my relationship. And what I discovered was that underneath it was a lot of fear
Yeah.
of things not working out, fear of making a wrong decision, fear of failure, fear of loss and the pain that would come with that. So, as I started doing some of my own inner work and sharing more of that journey, I realized how many other people resonated and could use a little support in their own journey to feel more secure in their relationship. So, that's why it became so important for me.
Yeah, I mean, having that personal journey is so powerful. It makes you care so much because you really have gone through all of that. I have two questions though on your journey. Do you think you would have felt like, do I love him enough if social media wasn't in the picture?
Oof, it's such a good question because I also sometimes would compare my relationship to things in real life as well. Like,
Right.
like if there was a couple around me, even if it was like a best friend, I would be like, oh, they seem like they're just being more flirty or something today. Like, I think there still would have been an element of it, but I do think that the social media algorithm can heighten it, especially once it knows that you even have an inkling of a thought and you stay an extra 3 seconds on that one video. It's like, well, let me send you 1,000 more of those. Or if there would be a video that said, if you're not sure, then you have to leave right now. Like there's very black or white advice about relationships. And so I would hear something like that. And without any sort of context explaining anything, I would take that and run and start questioning my own relationship. So I think it
Right.
definitely has impacted.
That's a good point that like even without social media, you're still confronted with things that might trigger anxiety or fear just in your life. And also as you're talking, I was just thinking like maybe the explore page is just a sign of what you're anxious about. Because like that's just it's
So
just a
true.
collection of things you're just overthinking about. And the other question about your journey is more like, okay, you had your side of all this anxiety that you had bubbling up and that you were dealing with. At what point in this period did you like talk about it with your partner? Did he have the same feelings? Like, what was that like?
Yeah. So we were about 3.5, 4 years into our relationship when I had this big breakdown moment. And I basically said to him, like, I'm not sure I love you the same way anymore. And I was totally spiraling. Like, I think people today call it like crashing out. I'm like, I'd never had heard of that term until Love Island this year. But like, I was crashing out and basically like crying and sobbing and saying, I don't know if I love you the same. And I felt so scared. And in that moment, he met me with such compassion and support. And he was like, well, of course, I would be, really sad if you didn't want to be together. But at the same time, like it makes sense that you're comparing our relationship and then feeling really anxious about it. Like he was able to be a very steady, supporting person in that moment. And I think that was this like light bulb of like, what are you doing? Like, get
Yeah.
it together. So I feel like that kind of was a more extreme conversation, but in the maybe 1 to 2 years before, when I kind of started feeling a little more anxious but didn't really give it much space, I would kind of say things like, well, my parents got a divorce and sometimes I worry that that could happen. And not that that's wrong or bad. Like, I've since changed my perspective on that. But back then I was just like, oh, that would be so hard. And, really like made that into this bad, wrong thing. And so I would kind of tell him that. Or if we had gotten into like a little disagreement, I would maybe be quiet and withdraw. And then he would eventually be like, wait, what's wrong? And we would like talk through it. I feel like up
Yeah.
until I started doing my own inner work on relationships, I didn't really understand that a lot of the patterns I was bringing in weren't that healthy. And I don't say that in a judgy way towards myself, but I would pull back and try to get him to come chase me down to figure out what was wrong, things like that that I had learned growing up or was modeled to me. So I think he probably sensed that like there were things that I felt
Yeah.
anxious about before I really had this more open conversation. But I would say that big breakdown moment was kind of like the kicker.
Wow, that's so hard. I mean, I can relate to that kind of big breakdown moment. I'm sure listeners can relate. But it's like what a beautiful thing though that he met you with that compassion and just he didn't take it as like, oh my gosh, like she's scared to be with me. This isn't going to work. Like that could have gone a very different way if he was a different person. So
Yeah.
to me, it's like you having your crash out moment made you realize that it's like that's actually he's a great person because of how he reacted to that. But if you had not had that moment, you wouldn't have learned that necessarily.
Exactly. And it kind
Yeah.
of made me want to start doing more exploration on this because I mean, at the time it started a little bit as an inner critic voice where I was like, okay, clearly you're the problem. Like, you need to figure out what's going on. It flip flopped from like, maybe he's not right for you to maybe like, oh my gosh, you're the toxic one. Like, you have to figure out what's going on. But eventually I realized like neither of us had a problem. The relationship didn't have a problem. I didn't have a problem. It was just about learning how to feel more safe within
Yes.
myself and then within the relationship to actually like give and receive love.
Let's talk about that inner safety. Okay. Can you tell us what you mean when you said feeling safe within myself?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned a little earlier, when I was kind of digging more into some of this, I realized I had these core fears really about like losing my partner, losing my independence, uncertainty. How do I know if I'm making a right choice? What if this doesn't work out and there's so much pain and heartbreak? Like, there were all these things that felt unsafe about moving into a deeper committed relationship, even though they weren't conscious. But I came to find that the little actions I was doing were really due to a lack of feeling safe. And a lot of it wasn't necessarily my, boyfriend or fiance or now husband. Like, he wasn't doing things to me that were unsafe. He's not an unsafe person, but I would react to something that he was doing, or I would create a story about something, and then I would feel this sense of lack of safety, whether it was
Mm-hmm.
physically in my body, like I would have sensations from fight or flight responses, or I would have like a heaviness in my chest, or I would start having like my heartbeat really fast and just feel this dread or pressure or fear come up. Or maybe it was mentally like creating all these stories like, well, you shouldn't be having to work this hard at something, or, everyone else seems to just be having an easy
Mm,
time. And like, it would feel like mentally, I didn't feel safe to just relax into things. Emotionally, all ranges of emotions, whether it's sad or lonely or, fear, whatever it is, like that could come up and I could become easily overwhelmed if I had those emotional reactions. And then even spiritually, I only recently have dipped my toe into being or identifying as a spiritual person because I didn't grow up with it, but I didn't feel safe that something bigger was helping me
mm,
or that I was co-creating my relationship with my partner. It felt like I was the only one responsible for everything and like I had to figure all this out on my own. And so those are kind of the four pillars when I think of inner safety: physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. If you feel a lack of safety within those areas in your life, then it's going to feel challenging when you're in relationship with others, whether that's with a friend or someone you're dating or a long-term partner or even siblings and parents. Like, if we don't have that sense of inner safety when we relate to others, we're going to feel less regulated. Does that feel clear?
yeah, super clear. I really appreciate that breakdown and the four pillars. I'm thinking like how it must have been before you started working on this, like how exhausting it is to live like an embodied experience of not feeling safe all the time, or anytime any kind of emotion comes up, you're basically freaking out physically and you don't even know what that means or why it's happening. You don't know how to like label it. There's no language for it. It's really confusing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like a lot of us really weren't modeled this. Like, even if we had the most loving, caring family dynamic, I feel like this generation has really made a shift in starting to talk about emotions and
Yeah.
understand emotions and like process them in a healthy way. So I don't feel like we really were modeled exactly how to feel more safe emotionally, but it is challenging, like you can really get stuck feeling frustrated that you're having an uncomfortable thought, an uncomfortable emotion, an uncomfortable physical sensation, or maybe, feeling just a general lack of safety in the world around you and feeling like, well, the world is a dangerous place, or like I don't know how to get support from people. So those
Mm.
4 pillars, when you're not feeling like you do have ways to show up and nurture the sense of inner safety, they can just feel like, oh, like everything feels so hard, or like, why does this always happen to me? And it's kind of unintentionally slipping into that mode where people are doing this to me. And we don't realize that we also play a role a lot of times, not in abusive situations, but in a lot of like the dynamics that are in our life.
Yeah, that's such a great point and nuance because it's like it really does take two in everything that's happening. Like you said, for not counting abusive situations, but yeah, like okay, can we bring this into an example? Because something that comes up a lot in early dating is like, and this is the hardest part about early dating. It just feels like everything is suspended in the air. No one has their feet on the ground because you're just trying to figure out, do we like each other? Do we actually want to invest time in each other and commit to seeing each other just to see if we even want to commit to the next step? And it's really hard because you do have to have so much inner safety to get through that period where you're like, I just met this person. There seems to be a connection. I want it to go somewhere. I don't know if they're on the same page. So what does it look like to have inner safety in that moment for people who are dating?
Yeah. So I would say some of it will probably start before you're even heading into a dating situation, which is like, okay, let's say it's before your even first date with this person and you're just trying to set the tone for how you want to show up. You can kind of think, okay, physically, like even if this feels a little uncomfortable, you're going to meet a new person. Even if you're not dating, like going to meet a new person for coffee is just like sometimes, you can have the
Yes.
feels and you're like, it's like anticipation. So physically, like how do I want to ground myself before or during if I notice the butterflies or the anticipation, like taking grounding breaths and just using my 5 senses to come back to the present moment. Like you can do that before the date, right as the date's walking up. During the date, if you notice any uncomfortable sensations, like you can notice them, but not necessarily rush to change or fix them. Just keep having those slow, gentle breaths, keep grounding yourself in the present moment, keep coming back to what that person's actually saying in the physical present moment versus kind of trying to analyze it in the mind. So
Yes.
that's physically like one example.
That's a great example. I just want to pause there because I think that is super, super key and practical of like when you feel yourself where you're in that moment where you're like watching yourself on the date, you know what I'm talking about? Like you're kind of outside
Mm,
of your body, you're like analyzing, like you said, but it's like if you just clue back into what's in front of you, your coffee, your appetizers, your drinks, whatever, and whatever the person's saying and the restaurant or whatever space you're in, like it really does help you snap back into the now and kind of you're not ignoring your emotions. Like you said, you're just like, okay, I have these feelings but like here right now I should be present. Yeah, I feel safer to do that.
exactly. Like giving yourself the chance to be present and then trusting that you can always analyze after the fact. Like you don't have to figure it out right in that second. And this is something
Yeah.
I share with clients, even if they're in a long term relationship out
Right.
on a date. Like if you notice yourself comparing to the couple next to you at the restaurant, like just return back to what your partner's saying or like this moment, because you're not going to reconnect back to your partner when you're focused elsewhere.
Yep. So true. Okay, so what are some of the steps we can take? You kind of mentioned a little bit earlier about the pillars, but if someone's really struggling, like every interaction just makes them question their worth or like, oh my gosh, am I gonna like there are some times where it's like you're in early dating and you feel like if it doesn't work out, you're doomed. like it's over. So what's a step someone can take to start to create more inner safety in those moments?
Yeah. So I was going to say too, like with the other pillars, it was a beautiful question to kind of keep those pillars going. Like before you're even going on dates to begin with, I think especially like the mental and spiritual, maybe even pillars could be useful to reflect on and just kind of strengthen a little bit. Because mentally, if we are making every interaction about the other person mean something about our worthiness, then we're going to inevitably create a lot of pain for ourselves. And so, really strengthening some of your own beliefs about yourself, because the beliefs we have about ourselves or about dating are absolutely going to affect our experience. Like, if this person is not interested after one more date, and we take that to mean, okay, well, that means I'm not going to find my person because I'm just, this person didn't see me as valuable, then that's going to really affect how we show up. And I know this isn't an easy switch. We can get more into later how
Yeah.
to change that belief, but at least acknowledging, oh, that belief isn't helpful for me. And that's going to create a lack of safety for me heading into dates if I'm measuring my worthiness based off of that. And so reframing to something more helpful, like, if that person wasn't interested in me, then it would have never worked out. And so I'm one step closer to finding the person that will be really interested in me, right? Or like bringing that spiritual pillar in, like, I trust that it's working out and there's a bigger plan. It doesn't even have to be from a higher power. It can just be like, I trust that there's a bigger plan and that other people are out there waiting for me and that it will make sense one day, right? So I think
Yes.
that has to happen. I don't
Before.
think that, yeah, I don't think you have to heal before you start dating. And I don't like the advice that you have to fully love yourself before you love someone else, because I think it happens
Me either.
together. But
Yeah.
I do think that if you clearly notice unhelpful beliefs and they don't create a sense of inner safety for yourself, you have to at least acknowledge that that is going to affect your experience, and then look for a more helpful belief and find evidence of that other belief being true.
So well said. I mean, I'm so glad that you also highlighted the mental and spiritual aspects of this because, like, as you're talking, I'm kind of thinking about my own journey with creating inner safety for myself in my dating experience. And it was a lot, it was heavily on the mental. It was heavily on the, like, how I view my dating journey. And like I wrote a whole story for myself that made me feel really happy. I loved dating. I had so much fun. That's why I started this podcast. Like I was having so much joy in it, but it also, to what you said, I was finding evidence that supported those beliefs of like dating is
Mm-hmm.
fun. I get to do this. This is a privilege that I have that women generations ago did not have. Like
Yeah.
this is something we get to choose who we're going to be with. It's not forced on us. Like, so those beliefs made it a lot more fun. And luckily, I think I had done a lot of work on myself to not fall into the trap of like, oh, I keep going on these first dates. It's not working out. Something must be wrong with me. But I understand like a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people are still in that, like, I can't get past the first, second date. What's wrong with me? And it's like, you get to reshape it. That doesn't have to be your truth, is what you're saying. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And even with the emotional pillar, too, like one of the biggest things that I learned emotionally to feel more safe within myself is just having compassion for whatever I was feeling. Like, I think the reason I felt so scared and so anxious in my relationship and for having that anxiety was because I took the experience of anxiety, the emotion, and then I was so judgmental towards it. Like, well, you shouldn't ever feel that way. You're a bad partner for feeling that way. And it was such a critical voice. And so, whether that's in dating, maybe you again feel a sense of rejection, or you feel sad, or you feel disheartened after a date that doesn't go well. Can you still be gentle with yourself for feeling
Mm-hmm.
that way instead of like, well, I shouldn't care about this, or, I should just move on quicker? Let yourself feel what you feel and then choose the next step that will help you, shift that emotion. But I think when you try to fix your emotions versus accepting them first and being compassionate with them, it creates like this inner battle.
Yeah. I mean, the light bulb kind of just went off for me as you were just saying that of like, to create inner safety, you have to actually be a safe person for yourself, which is like giving
Mm-hmm.
yourself that compassion and giving yourself the acceptance, the space to feel things without judgment and kind of being like, okay, critical voice, you're there, but I don't need to listen to you. Like, have fun, that's all right. Like, that's at least how I handle my inner critic of like, okay, you're here. Welcome to the party.
For sure. And a lot of the times I say, like, what would you want someone else to be saying to you right now? Like, sometimes a coaching client will come to me and they have this like beautiful question and they want me to answer it for them. And I try not to do that too often because I mean, I answer people's questions all the time, but not big life questions about what
Yeah.
they should be doing because that's theirs to make. But a lot of times I'll say, okay, you brought this situation to me. What were you hoping I would say to you? And a
Mm,
lot of times they're like, I just wanted you to say that that was normal or that was okay and that I didn't do anything wrong. And I'm like, well, what if you could actually be that for yourself? Like, can
yeah.
you give yourself that? Not even validating your experiences of saying this is right or wrong, but just like emotional validation of it's okay that that happened.
Oh my gosh, this is amazing. I'm loving just the wisdom you're bringing. And I want to keep going. I want to switch gears. I want to talk about emotional needs because something we talked about offline is meeting your own emotional needs. And I find this so fascinating. It was something that I had a lot of trouble with in therapy. I remember feeling very frustrated learning about this concept of meeting my own emotional needs and being like, what? Like, I have to do this myself? Like, why do I even
Mm-hmm.
have to have a partner then? What's the point? Like, and I remember feeling, when I was learning about interdependence, like just feeling that, like, oh, what the hell, kind of
Yeah.
disappointment. But, can you share a little bit about why it's so important to be able to meet your own emotional needs?
Yeah. So I love that interdependence word you brought in because I do think it's a balance, right? Like if we go on either end of the extremes where we're like, I'm the only one that meets my needs and I don't need anyone else, then we become so independent. It's almost like hyper independence where we're just like, well, yeah, I don't need anybody. But if we go to the opposite end of that spectrum and we rely only on other people to meet our needs, then we can be more codependent. And so I think what I didn't realize was that I was placing my partner on a pedestal and saying, I can only be happy if you do these exact things for me in this exact way. Or if you respond to this comment I made in the perfect way, then you're doing it right. But if you're not, then you're doing it wrong. And a really common example is reassurance, like seeking reassurance or approval or validation for something from a partner. And I think there really is a sweet spot. It's totally okay to want that support from a partner, but if you can only feel safe when other people tell you that something is okay, then it's going to create this reliance. So
Hmm.
I think learning to meet your emotional needs is about being curious with yourself and understanding what am I seeking from other people and how can I at least give some of it to myself. So if I text my friends and say, hey, like, do you like this outfit? Sometimes that's totally fine. I still do that, right? But if every single time I'm shopping, I can't make any decisions or validate my own sense of style at all, then it's going to be hard to meet other needs for like validation or, the approval of my own outfit. So that's like a common one that I see
Yeah.
a lot in the work with relationship anxiety because people want other people to say like, oh yeah, you're in a great relationship, but you have to be able to give yourself that permission.
Okay, so what you're saying is to meet your own emotional needs, it's like what you're seeking from other people, you need to be able to give some of it to yourself. I guess you can't give all of it to yourself. Is that accurate?
I would say so. I mean, I think there's certain things that we just heavily outsource to other people that we can
Mm,
also start giving to ourselves. So even emotional connection, like that's one where a lot of my clients are like, wait, emotional connection, like shouldn't someone else need to
right.
emotionally connect with me in order for me to feel emotionally connected? But if you break those two words down, it's like, how can you better connect to your own emotions? Maybe it's just by noticing what they are and being more compassionate with them, or even just noticing the sensations in your body and like slowing down a little bit to connect to the emotional experience, right? So it doesn't, again, have to be all or nothing. I'm not going to say you have to meet all of your needs perfectly before you go to ask someone else for them. But if you're asking somebody and you don't even know what ways to meet your own needs, then it's a little bit tough to know
Yeah.
that, oh, like someone else might not know how to meet them either if you haven't taken the time to explore that.
Got it. Can you give an example, like from just again, I like to keep things a little concrete, like from your own life, like of how you have met one of your emotional needs? Like, what did that look like?
Yeah. So I would say that for my wedding planning, I really learned to meet the need for approval or like validation is another way of saying it I would say like I was so much better at that than I would have been 5 years ago or even 2 years ago. And I love my best friend to death, but she was kind of the opposite in this situation. Like she had 25 different dresses that she tried on and was asking all of us, like, which one do you think looks best on me? And like, it felt like a much different experience. Whereas I realized, oh, this is the dress that I love. And if it fits me, then I want to wear it. Right. So
Yeah.
I was able to give myself that approval. And even though my mom and my best friend were still there, I wasn't necessarily asking them, do you think I should wear this? I was able to validate that for myself. Whereas even in my business over the last 5 years, I think that's grown a lot too, because at the beginning, I would always go to Nate, my partner, and be like, okay, what do you think I should do? You know, because he's just a very strategic person. And I feel like he has a lot of that business savvy type of energy. Whereas now I realize that his advice isn't even always helpful for me because he's coming from a totally different industry, totally
Yeah.
different perspective. And so I've learned to turn that around a little bit more and start by at least checking in with myself. Well, what do you think about that? Whether it's in a journaling session or doing breath work and kind of like slowing down to tune into my own self-trust.
Yeah. And that's how you build it. I mean, we talk about self-trust a lot on this podcast, and like building it literally looks like asking yourself, well, what would you do? You know, what would I
Mm-hmm,
do?
mm-hmm.
You know, yeah, that is how you build it. And it's like then doing that and being like, oh, that actually worked out pretty well. Let's do that again. You know, and that repetition really does help. I also want to
Yeah.
highlight one thing you mentioned when we first started talking about this about like you're looking for your partner to react in a very specific way. And if they're not, it's bad. And if they are, it's good. I have a good example of this that happened this week. One thing that's really important to me in my relationship and even with my friendships and stuff is that like I want to celebrate with people properly. Like I want, if something good happens, I want to be like, share the news and it's like really like highlighted and lifted up in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And so like I got featured in the New York Times this week, which was really huge. And I was so happy. This is my second time being featured at the New York Times. And the last time was for a completely different business. So I was like so happy. And at first, my husband, I told him in the morning he was groggy. He was not really responding. And I was kind of disappointed in his reaction. I didn't say that, but I was like, okay, that's his reaction. Fine. Like, it's not my favorite. But then, like, later in the day, he was sending the article around to our friends and his family and stuff. And it's like, okay, that is how he's choosing to celebrate this. Is
Mm-hmm.
it my first choice of like how I'd want my partner to react? Maybe not, but I'm recognizing that he's doing that. And that is like filling that need for me.
For sure. And I'm curious, like, how did you celebrate that win for yourself?
I mean, I posted on Instagram. It's really just the main celebration. That's a really good question. I guess like when I first got the confirmation that it would go live, I was on vacation in Paris. Like we were just in Paris, and I remember just being like extremely happy. I was like just so happy for like 10 minutes just in that moment of like, oh my God, it's happening. Yeah. So I guess that's how I celebrated it. And my best friend sent me flowers. So it's like,
I love that.
you know, your partner doesn't need to be the only person
For sure.
to meet those needs. And so I felt really celebrated in that moment.
Yeah. And I think too, I love where you went later with it that like maybe the perfect reaction in the morning would have been like, oh my gosh, like I'm freaking out. I'm so excited
Yeah.
and kind of like making it a thing in that moment. But then in his own way later, there was a celebration. And so, of course, you could still express like, oh, that would have been really great. But at the same time, you did end up seeing the need being met in a slightly different way. So I think
Yes.
that's the difference between like, okay, everything has to be exactly how I would do it versus leaning into the differences of a partner.
Yeah. And like a former version of myself, and I'm sure you relate too, would hyperfixate on what he didn't do and not even
Mm-hmm.
notice the what was actually happening. I think I just wanted to highlight that because I think that shift is so key in relationships when you kind of open the aperture, like, you know, and kind of widen your lens on how people are showing you interest, affection, love, all those things that you crave and want. When you widen that out, you actually notice that it comes your way a lot more. And
Yeah.
that is so, so helpful in terms of like getting your needs met from your partner and other people.
Yeah. One of the first quotes that I feel like I ever heard in my self development journey, and maybe you've heard it before, And sometimes it feels cheesy, but other times I'm like, oh my gosh, this is totally spot on. Is Tony Robbins when he says where focus goes, energy flows.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's like, it's so true. Like what you focus on, you're putting your energy toward, and that's going to affect how you see things. Like if you're focused on what's missing, what didn't happen, you're probably going to find plenty of evidence for that. But if you're focusing on what is working, what did happen, the ways you did receive love, it will create more of the energy towards that thing. So
Yes.
it's hard to remember sometimes, but when I'm in a quote, quote, like negative state, or if I'm in kind of like a spirally state where I'm just feeling blah about everything, I really try to redirect.
Yes, I love that. I know it's cheesy, but it's true. It's so true. So, one of my listeners asked me this on this topic. I already meet my own needs. So, what should I look for in a partner who still adds something meaningful to my life? How do you answer that?
Ooh, that's such a good question. I feel like this is an example of what you just said with like learning to see the little ways that like a partner is still showing up to support you. Even if you don't necessarily need someone, you can still want them and have them add things. And so, like, looking for ways that someone does still in their own way bring something new to the dynamic. Or I feel like looking for ways that you can also, if you already meet your needs so well, like look for ways you can continue to receive from people that maybe you don't open up to now. So for example, like even if you're really good at making your dinner every night, or if you're really good at like having a routine and meeting those needs for yourself, like maybe this person would bring a sense of, hey, I want to help in this area, or hey, like I
Mm,
want to plan something for us to do, even though you have all of your needs met this week. Like I want to do something spontaneous for us. So I think there's still ways for someone to add something into the
yeah.
dynamic. And but you kind of have to look out and appreciate that, like, okay, well, I could have done that myself, but I don't always have to.
Yes. And that's so hard to learn if you're really independent. And I'm assuming this person who asked is, and I relate to the question as well. It's like, well, I'm already pretty happy, single.
Yeah.
Like, what am I doing? But I think there are a lot of reasons to have a partner, and a lot of it is the not romantic stuff that people tend to brush over. It's like you get to build a life with someone, and there's a lot of non romantic parts about it. It's not just about like the emotional connection part.
Yeah, for sure. And I do think that receiving love can sometimes be harder than giving it for a
Oh,
lot of
really?
people.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've found that in a lot of the clients that I work with. I would say that when they receive a lot of love, it can lead to questioning, do I really deserve this? And, you know, shouldn't I be able to do this on my own? Kind of like that question, why should I need help from
Mm,
someone? Or like, why should I lean into this when I could do it? And I think that can be, yeah, again, like it doesn't mean it's good or bad. It's just something to notice. If you feel like you're always giving to yourself or others, can you open up to more of that receiving energy?
yeah. And I want to come back to that because I have another question on that. But I first want to ask, when do you talk about needs in a relationship? Like, do you talk about this stuff, like meeting your own needs, meeting their needs, all that stuff? Like, what's your advice for that?
Yeah, so I would say if I was doing it in a more proactive way than I probably did in my relationship, I would start weaving it in as soon as you really are comfortable starting to open up and share more vulnerably. It doesn't have to be like 10 minutes into the first date and you're like, okay, like here's my 27 needs. Like, can you meet them? But I feel like starting to get to know this person and how they do like to support a partner is probably
Mm,
worthwhile, even if you're not saying, hey, I need this exact thing. Getting curious about, okay, well, what is your take on this, or how do you like to show up for someone,
I
to
love that
explore that.
advice. I love that advice because you do learn so much about like, okay, how do they prefer to show up? How do they naturally show up? And in your head, you can be like, after the date, because we're not analyzing on the date, but after the date, you can be like, does that align well with what I'm looking for, instead of being like, here's my list. By the way, Sarah, like I did do that on dates. I'm not, and I'm not saying you should do that because that was definitely a mistake. Like I did had a lot of trial and error in my journey, but I definitely had some days where I was like, these are my five needs.
And honestly, like you said, it was trial and error, and that could have been something where you look back and you're like, okay, maybe there was a more creative way I could have brought that in. But like, I think all the more power to you for like having that more boundaried approach where you're like, this is what I'm looking for. Like, are you down or not?
You know what? Yeah, you're right. Good for me for being brave and like trying to learn how to communicate that, even though it was probably like too much too soon. Yeah.
One of the little lessons you learn along the way. But honestly, like I'll raise my head and say, I was not communicating these things proactively. Like kind of like I said in the beginning of my journey, a lot of this I learned, 3 to 4 years in when I started exploring these patterns for myself. And so I'm not saying that someone should stick it out 3 to 4 years before they start meeting their own needs, but as long as you feel like for the most part, your needs are being met as you're dating this person, I think some of it can build over time as new things come up. So unless there's major needs that aren't being met right away, like it might be able to build more and more.
Yeah, that's reassuring. I think people are looking for signs like you were as well. Like, is this going to work? Am I in love enough? Is this good enough? And knowing that it can build and evolve, it's like that. It's just so much more room for grace and just like how it actually works, which is just not so cut and dry. Things change, things evolve. Okay, so I want to go back to what we were just talking about like you said, it's harder to receive love for some people. And I think that kind of ties into kind of our beliefs about ourselves and how they show up in dating. So can you talk about like how, if we have a core belief that we're unworthy, how does that actually play out in a relationship?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways it can play out. I mean, one is it could be very heavy on the inner critic, where you are kind of constantly analyzing if you made a mistake or, oh, like I'm such a bad partner for doing this. Like I messed that up and I'm not worthy of this partner who's so nice. Like I think there was a split second and multiple times throughout my relationship where like, in that moment where I broke down sobbing and then Nate was so compassionate with me, it's like, oh my gosh, like he's so much better at this than I am, like it can kind of lead to comparing yourself to your partner or to other people and how they relate to others. So it can definitely play out that way. But if you are receiving a lot of love and there's this deep belief of, well, I don't feel like I'm worthy of love unless I earn it by being perfect or like by making sure I'm giving love in this great way, then it can just create this like push-pull dynamic where you really want that thing, but subconsciously like you don't feel like you can receive it.
Yeah, and it puts a strain on the relationship, right? When that is kind of in the middle of you and the other person of like, well, I didn't deserve this, or I'm not worthy, or like maybe there's something else going on here that I'm missing, like, are they playing me? There's sometimes that, I think that's another way it can play out sometimes of like, this isn't real. There's something else going on because it can't be, there's no way they can actually show me this much love and it be real.
Yeah. And when I work on this belief with my clients, I mean, firstly, especially if you've had this belief for decades, it's going to be really hard to like shift it overnight. So I'm not a big person that's just like look in the mirror every day and say I'm worthy. Like I just don't feel like that's going to be the key. But for some people, it really helps them. So I'm not yucking anyone's yum. But I think when it comes to really shifting that belief, there needs to be a shift away from just like your achievements and, oh, I'm worthy because I checked off my to-do list today, to looking for your inherent qualities. Like I showed up and was thoughtful, or I showed up and did my best, or like these things that are just like core to who I am, that regardless of how I show up, like I know that these are who I am and I'm worthy to receive that love from people just by being myself. And so it's less about like checking off a list or getting to some destination and more about just who you are in the journey of how you operate.
I love that. Yeah, it kind of goes back to just how important it is to know what you value in yourself and not using external sources to validate you as a person, like comparing yourself to social media, comparing yourself to other couples. It's like, well, actually, what do I care about and how I show up in the world? So well said, Sarah. You're amazing. I want to shift gears. I want to get into a listener question because every episode we do a dating dilemma. So I chose one for you. I'm going to read it and we can discuss. Are you ready? Also, I apologize. To listeners, I'm a little under the weather, so bear with me. Hi, Talia. I, 28 female, have been with my boyfriend, 31 male, for 6 months. Our relationship is fun, tender, intentional, aligned on future goals, and I'm having the best sex of my life. However, in the last few months, I've been having crippling levels of relationship anxiety. I have a lot of things going on in my life, job changes, caring for a sick parent, so my stress levels are running high anyways. I can't tell if this anxiety is just anxiety or if it's telling me something meaningful about the relationship. I have a history of staying too long when things are, quote, good on paper. My boyfriend and I are talking about it and I'm going to therapy, but honestly, I'm exhausted. How long should I keep working at this before throwing in the towel?
Such a good question. Thank you for sharing that. So, the question of is it anxiety or intuition, I feel like is such a tough one, right? Because we're looking for that kind of certainty of like, is it this or that, and that like black or white answer. There's something that I think is interesting about the question about what's going on in her life. And you can, I think, negatively project things onto something or positively. So, like when I'm feeling my best and I'm like, I'm crushing it right now, like I feel so good, then usually I see my relationship or other things in my life, my business, with more positive lenses. Whereas when I'm not feeling great and when I'm feeling really stressed or not enough, and some of it is cyclical with my hormones each month as well, I can project outwardly like that stress or tension onto it. And so that could be something potentially to note. It doesn't mean that this person has to wait until they're feeling more grounded within themselves, but if they feel like it was a switch that happened due to the circumstances in their life, then it could be worth just seeing if there's a way to create more of that inner safety, like we were talking about in this conversation, and seeing if that creates any shift in how they're feeling in the dynamic. But this is one of those things where I really encourage self-trust. Like I wouldn't say you should stay another 3 months or 6 months. Like I'm not here to tell someone how they should or shouldn't make a decision. But I think that if they have a lot of great qualities and there's a lot of good happening in the relationship, then really doing their best to cultivate that inner safety first. And hopefully from there, they can tune more into their own self-trust about, okay, I'm feeling really safe in myself and I'm still having this
Mm,
anxiety. Okay, like maybe there's things I need to explore. Whereas, like, oh, I realize that I'm feeling much better and safer and I'm actually seeing the relationship in this more positive way again. Maybe it was just coming from my own fears. So I'm curious what your thoughts
yeah.
are.
No, that's a great answer. I agree. It's like, can you sit in this discomfort for a little bit to see if the dust settles on the non-relationship things going on in your life, like the job changes and caring for a sick parent, which is really hard? I would ask her, like, can you bring your partner into that? Like, to me, going through stuff like that is actually what is a great test of the relationship, especially within that first year. You know, they've been dating for 6 months. So it's like, can you actually rely on him? How, like, this is the
Mhm.
stuff that, this is the hard part, is where you actually see if the relationship can work. To me, when it's easy and good and fun and there's nothing else going on, like you said, like everything, you're crushing it in life, you're killing it. It's like, oh yeah, this is great. But when shit hits the fan, like, what is going on? So that's what I would say, like, can you stick it out a little longer and see if you can ask your partner for support in these other
Yeah.
things and then see how it feels. I'm more comfortable telling people like a certain amount of time because I do think, like she mentions, she stays in things too long. I think women tend to do this, but I would say like up to a year. Up to a year is when you can know, like, go through 4 full seasons and really see, are you feeling anxiety most of the time? Like, is it, what's the ratio of peace to anxiety overall? So I think a year is a good amount of time to me, but I understand why you don't want to like tell her like when to make the call.
Yeah, I like to kind of, and I think there's like benefits to both. I think I like to try and give people like something that they can use to coach themselves, and
Right.
then they can decide because like what you said, the ratio, for example, it's like you can kind of tune into that. The only reason I hesitate is just because I know how much I used to cling on to that advice,
Hmm.
and then it was like it felt like I was just like, oh well, Talia just said I need to wait for a year, so it's like I'm going to do that, you
Right.
know?
But yeah, obviously, like if things get really worse before that, like 8 months, and whatever, yeah, you can make the call sooner. But it's like, I guess I have the experience of, I was with my last partner for 6 years and I was in that mode, like what she's describing, for like 3 years. Like, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and then I ended it because kind of what you were saying before, like everything else in my life was really great, but the relationship was giving me all my anxiety. Like all the anxiety I had
Mm-hmm.
was just from the relationship. I was like, this isn't what I want. Like, this isn't going to work. It's been 6 years. Like, this is clearly
Yeah,
not it. So
for sure.
yeah, like that's why I guess like I'm like, it's okay to give yourself a time limit if you're feeling like you don't want to stick around too long. Cause I've been there.
For sure. And
Yeah.
I think something that's so important is like giving yourself permission to stay or go
Yeah.
versus like needing
Mm,
anyone else to, right? Because
yeah.
like eventually after the 3 years in that relationship that you just said where you didn't feel like it was working, you gave yourself permission to go. But I gave myself permission to stay, even though
Yeah.
I had on and off anxiety. And like there is no right or wrong answer. I feel like no matter what happens, like obviously if my relationship didn't work out, I would be devastated, but I used to feel like, well, then I would have missed the only love that I could have in my life. And,
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
like it used to be
Yeah.
so scary to think like, well, this is the only person that could like make me happy. And so I feel like realizing, not in a way of saying everyone should just go break up with their person, but just
Yeah.
realizing like you'll be okay no matter what, I think is important, and not making this decision like the only decision that
Yeah.
will matter in your life.
I relate so much what you said earlier. My parents are divorced too. I had a whole, like when I was engaged, like I had a whole moment of like, oh my God, my whole life has just been about avoiding divorce. Like, I was like, oh
Mm-hmm.
no. And yes, I relate to that too of like, well, what if it doesn't work out? And it's like, oh, it's okay if it doesn't work out. It really is.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, for sure. It would obviously be very
You
painful
know,
and
it'd be
like,
painful, but
yeah.
big picture, long term, like it would be okay. Sarah, I before we wrap up, is there anything I want to know? Sorry, let me say that again. Sarah, before we wrap up, I just want to know: is there anything you want to see more of in dating and or relationship culture, like maybe the conversation online or just with your clients?
Such a good question. I think the hardest part about it is that so many people still feel shame for having quote, quote, insecure attachment patterns. Like relationship anxiety, if you zoom out, it's like it could really cover anything that you feel anxious about in a relationship, whether it's like, I get anxious and then I avoid things, or I get anxious and then I cling on. Like, whatever pattern you have, or a mix of both, like that's some form of anxiety coming into the relationship. And I feel like people feel so shamey about having any sort of dynamic that isn't this picture perfect, like right off into the sunset experience. And so the challenge with it is that the more we feel shame, the less we feel comfortable sharing with others. And then it creates more shame because people feel so alone in their experience. And so I don't know if it needs to be on social media because not everyone's going to just document like you and I have like our journey with this, but just the little vulnerable moments between friends, or sharing a story can be so helpful. Like I'll just give one example. I had a group coaching program once, and this girl had been in the experience with me and the other women because she felt anxious in her relationship, and she was going on a trip with some of her best friends in the world, and it was a couples trip. And she ended up being more vulnerable and opening up to them, even though she's like, I've never seen any sort of similar dynamic between
Mm,
them. Like they seem so confident, so sure. And her best friend was like, oh my gosh, like I've had this same thing, or like I've been going through
right.
that, and that doesn't always happen, which is why I think people are scared. It's like, well, what if someone says, I've never felt that way? And then you feel like the
Even
shame
more alone.
again.
Yeah.
But I think that with the right trusted people, you can ease into it and hopefully create a little bit less of that shame based environment, and make sure that you feel confident sharing, like, yeah, this I know is my own kind of thing and I'm working on it, or I'm trying to figure it out, but I just wanted to open up to you. And that can create so much less of that alone feeling and,
Yeah.
oh, I'm not normal, something's wrong with me, when we can have that shared experience. So that would be something that's top of mind.
Well, it also sounds like that goes back to inner safety because to be able to share and open up and know that you're going to be okay, even if they don't respond the way you're hoping, even if they don't meet you where you are, like you kind of match that energy, like you're going to be okay. So it's like you need that inner safety to be able to do it. So, and just know, like, if you're listening to this, like that's all a work in progress, right? It's
For
not
sure.
linear. There's no like point A to point B, you're done, all good. Like it's definitely a work in progress. So I really appreciate you sharing that. And I want to see more of that too. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll just add a plus one to what you shared of this is not like a one and done thing. There's no finish line. Like you can always deepen your level of physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, inner safety. Like I'm still deepening all of those things. I wouldn't say that I'm perfectly inner safe, or
Yeah,
perfectly safe within myself. So
totally. Well, Sarah, thank you so much. Where can everyone find more of you?
yeah, so I'm over at You Love and You Learn on Instagram, and my website is youloveandyoulearn.com. I have my podcast, my blog over on there. And if you want to better navigate relationship anxiety, on my social media profiles, I have the Relationship Anxiety Toolkit. Almost 900 students have gone through it at this point, and it's like a step-by-step guide that gives you some lessons and journal prompts and then little tools to actually become a more secure partner.
Incredible. Thank you so much, Sarah. This has been amazing.
Thank you so much for having me. I loved our chat.